going to go ahead and get started this evening. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for The State of the Bear with Blair Smyth. I'm Valerie Peacock. I'm the Clarice and Robert H. Smith educator at the National Sporting Library and Museum. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're a nonprofit library and museum in Middleburg, Virginia that focuses on promoting and preserving traditional field sports, equestrian pursuits, angling, wing shooting, landscape, sporting art, culture, and literature. We're open Fridays and Saturdays for visitors, and many of our exhibitions, art collections, and library catalog can be found online. If you're a member of the NSLM, thank you for your support. Your membership has made it possible for us to continue putting on exhibitions, hosting virtual programs, and continue to support research on the library. The NSLM is thrilled to be able to offer this program tonight in partnership with our friends at the Nature Conservancy. I just want to give you a few housekeeping details to kind of help you with the program tonight. So your audio is off. You can put questions throughout the program in the chat function. To get to that chat function, if you look at your top bar, you'll see something called View Options. Click that and you'll exit full screen and you'll be able to see Blair's screen as well as the chat. Please go ahead throughout the program, add any questions in there through the chat. We'll be collecting those and we'll be asking all the questions at the end of the program to Blair. Also, if you have any questions, technical questions or about the Nature Conservancy or the Library and Museum, put them in the chat as well and we're here to help you out. So I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Locke Ogans, who's the State Director of the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and she's going to begin the program tonight for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you for everyone at the National Sporting Museum for letting us make this presentation and be with you all tonight. It's been on the books for a long time, and I had great visions of being up there and having a glass of wine and seeing all the beautiful objects and exhibits in the museum. So I'm sorry we're on Zoom, but we are thrilled to be here with you. And I, as Valerie said, I'm the state director for the Nature Conservancy in Virginia. And what I'd like to do is just take a couple of minutes and set the stage for Blair's remarks just by briefly sharing a little bit of information about our work here at the Nature Conservancy. So Blair, if you could go, yeah, thank you. So the Nature Conservancy is the world's largest conservation organization, and we work in 72 countries and territories. And globally, we've protected over 119 million acres. We are science-based. We've got over 600 scientists who drive the work of our conservation teams on the ground and in the waters across the globe. So I always think of us as being applied science on steroids, really. The other thing you need to know about us is that we are bipartisan and we work with a big tent. We think that by working very closely with a variety of partners with different points of view, that we will come up with the best solutions to some of the tough questions that we are asked to face. And our work is truly local to global. We are deeply based locally here in Virginia. Blair is a great example of that. And we are very deeply engaged with the communities where we work. And I just wanted to make that point because particularly in this day and age of really taking a hard look at environmental justice, we think it's very important to bring in all the voices, not just to export solutions. And over 1 million people worldwide support our work as members. Blair, if you could go to the next one, I appreciate it. So as the globe is getting more and more crowded and its population approaches 9 billion people, what we're doing is working to try to address the world's greatest conservation and environmental challenges. It's a simple goal in a sense, and it's critical to achieve our mission of a world where people and nature thrive and flourish together in a mutually sustainable way. And even though it's very simple to say, I don't have to tell anyone on this call, I'm sure that it's very complex to do. And that's what makes us want to work not only with our colleagues around the world at the Nature Conservancy, but with many, many state and local and federal partners. And we couldn't do it unless we did it as a team. And every day, you know, we all have the pleasure of coming in to work knowing that all life on Earth depends on our mission, which makes it a little bit sobering in some ways, but also very meaningful to all of us. Blair, if you could just go to the next one. So we're really fortunate to work in Virginia, which is blessed with just remarkable diversity and beauty across the state. And this map just shows you where we work, literally from the mountains to the coast to out in the ocean. We have 4 major program areas, which you can see highlighted here on the map. And the one that Blair manages is the Allegheny Highlands Program in the Appalachians, which you'll hear more about soon. But the other thing for us for you all to know is that even though Virginia has state boundaries, nature does not recognize state boundaries. And the scale of our organization, because we have chapters in all 50 states, means that we could collaborate with our TNC colleagues and other partners to achieve conservation goals at scale. And one good example of this is in the Appalachian Mountains, which run from northern Alabama and Georgia all the way up to Canada. Can you go to the next slide, please, Blair? This is it's a pretty busy map, but it's an important map, and it is a depiction of how scientists predict that animals, birds, and amphibians will move as the climate changes. And Blair, if you could just put the cursor for me right over where the Appalachian Mountains are, you can see that the apps are actually what we refer to them internally sort of as a super highway. And it's very, very important for us to protect the ability for animals, plants, and people too, to adapt as the climate changes. And the work is also critical for humans. I could show you a different map that would show how critically important the forests of the Appalachians are to our drinking water supply on the East Coast. I can tell you that there are trees there growing and sequestering carbon and so keeping CO2 out of the atmosphere. And of course, I think especially with all the things that have been going on in the world, there's a brand new appreciation by many of us, even those of us who've loved nature all our life, for the benefits that nature just in and of itself provides to people. And so our goal is to make sure that this corridor exists and is protected into the future. And we are literally working at a continental scale to make sure that happens. Now, as I said before, Blair, my colleague Blair, works in the Appalachians, and he runs our Allegheny Highlands program, which is just right up in Hot Springs. And it is my great pleasure at this point to turn the program over to him, and he will talk to you a little bit about what he does and some of the friends he encounters as he does his work in the apps. So thanks, Blair.
Thanks, Locke. I appreciate it. And thanks for the Sporting Museum for having us tonight. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. My name is Blair Smyth. I'm the Allegheny Highlands Program Director for the Nature Conservancy here in Virginia. And just a little bit more about me and why I'm going to be talking to you about bears. I've been with TNC for roughly 2.5 years. Before that, I've spent most of my career as a wildlife biologist with a couple different universities and state agencies across the southeastern United States. I've been lucky enough to work with bears in a whole wide variety of settings. I've loved every minute of it. They're my favorite critter to work with. One of the most recent projects I've worked with was involved in trapping and collaring black bear sows in central Virginia. And as you can see in these photos, we'd catch the bear, we'd install a GPS collar, which is right here. We take a wide variety of biological measurements, pull a tooth. We didn't send that tooth off to get aged, so we could tell exactly how old the bear was. The neat thing about these GPS collars is it's like the bear walking around with the GPS in its little paw and hitting mark every 4 hours. And then every week or so, the bear would actually upload that data via satellite and email it to me, so I could just sit at my desk and see what the bear had been up to over the past few weeks. And so we then use this data, which is right here. This is all bear location data. We could use it to look at habitat use, home range sizes, and denning behavior, where bears were denning and what time of year they were going to den, what time of year that they den. With my job as a wildlife biologist, I also occasionally had to get bears out of tough or difficult or strange situations, like a bear in the Transportation Museum in downtown Roanoke, or a bear that got tangled in a cable and got hung up in this tree, and we had to go up and get it untangled and get out of there. So another great part of this job was getting to foster cubs into a wild den. So every once in a while, we'd have a sow, a black bear female, killed in a collision with a car or poached or something like that. We'd end up getting our hands on these black bear cubs. And so what do you do with them then? Since we had GPS collars on the sows, We knew where the den was. We were able to slip into that den and foster these cubs on a wild sow. And so bears have sows have incredibly strong maternal instincts, and they can't count real well. So it's pretty easy to slip in there, give the cubs to them, and she'll raise the cubs as her own. And so even with all the fun, exciting work I got to do, this was my job most of the days, just walking around figuring out why I couldn't catch bears. But even those are still better days when the bear shows up, flips over your trap, and then comes and poses in front of your camera to make sure you know he did it. So with that, I'll move on to talking a little bit about our Allegheny Highlands program. The Allegheny Highlands program area is over in the western part of the state. You can see it outlined in orange here, over the northwest corner. It composes a lot of Bath County, some of Highlands, some of Rockingham, and a little bit in Allegheny. You can see we're surrounded by public lands. All this dark green is actually United States Forest Service land. There's a variety of state agency land, a variety of easements, and here's Douthit State Park to give you some idea of where we are. So this is just a zoomed in map. This is our Warm Springs Mountain Preserve over in Bath County. The main parcel, which is right here, is roughly 7,300 acres. For those of you that are familiar with the Homestead Resort, I put a star right here over in Hot Springs. And like I mentioned, all the dark green is Forest Service, United States Forest Service land. And we actually share 13 miles of boundary with them, which really allows us the opportunity to come up with an amazing partnership. We've got some great cross-boundary projects, and we've got a lot of research going on. So just a little bit more history on Warm Springs Mountain. The Inglis family actually purchased Warm Springs Mountain in the 1920s to prevent development on the ridgetop up above the homestead. If you're standing here at the homestead, looking back towards the mountain, that whole mountain ridge is Warm Springs Mountain. Nature Conservancy, we purchased the mountain from Virginia Hot Springs in 2002 to just continue that legacy. It protects not only the scenic views and drinking water supply for the Homestead Resort and surrounding Warm Springs Valley, but also really continues to provide research and outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as being the backbone of our forest restoration work in public lands here in the western part of Virginia. So like mentioned, why do we work over here? You can see, looking at this map, these are biodiversity hotspots, and really the Central Appalachians, the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia, are really one of the hottest places for biodiversity east of the Mississippi. And I love this map, so I had to show it again. This really just shows the part of the world that we're working in, and shows the gradual movement of populations across the landscape in response to climate change. So as climate change occurs, species are going to need the ability to move both north and south, as well as up and down in elevation. And the Appalachians really provide that pathway for the entire eastern United States. So as we go forward, how do we conserve a landscape that both sustains biodiversity and provides ecosystem benefits and allows nature to rearrange in response to a changing climate? Well, we know that natural disturbances are major drivers of biodiversity. So each of these, whether it's pests and pathogens like the southern pine beetle up here, to wind events like tornadoes or derechos, or ice storms, or wildfire, each of these things changes the landscape, and they can reset or start over the successional process of forests getting older. So let's talk a little bit more about fire. This is a cross section of a tree from Kelly Mountain over in Augusta County, and using data from it's called a tree cookie. They cut down a dead tree, they cut another slice of it to form what's called a cookie. And so using data from the rings that they counted on this, you can go back and figure out that this tree actually started growing in 1821. And if you'll look at all these dates, each one of these little black marks is called a fire scar. And that actually shows that a fire moved across this landscape at least 11 times between 1821 and 1922. And so through dendrochronology work like this, through pollen studies and historical records, we and other scientists have figured out that fire was moving across these mountains, across the Appalachian Mountains, every 5 to 7 years. And so those fires didn't look like the big fires that are going on out west right now. These fires would absolutely burn hot in some areas, they kill some trees, but in a lot of areas it burn a little bit cooler, only kill a few of the trees and turn it more of an open woodlands. And in a lot of areas, the fire would just creep through underneath, burn off the leaf litter, but really didn't have much of an effect on the canopy. So the burns were really patchwork and created a wide variety of ages and structures across the landscape. So what happened right here? You can see from 1922 on, you don't see any fire scars. So the United States Forest Service and state forestry agencies really ramped up fire suppression. So in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps put thousands of people to work putting in fire line and doing wildland firefighting under the direction that all fires should be suppressed by 10 a.m. the next day. So with that occurring, pretty much all of the fire came off the landscape. And then Smokey showed up in the 40s and that just continued. So why is that important? Fire has really been a part of this landscape for thousands of years. And we know that most species in the Central Appalachians are well adapted to fire. Many of them are actually fire dependent. Some of our pine species have to have fire before the cone will even open and the seed will come out. And we know over there that our pine and our oak communities are declining. So why? Well, fire is really considered the great maintainer, and it's the disturbance we've removed from this ecosystem. And so the species that are showing up in these systems thrive in the absence of fire. So if you look at this photo on the left side of the road, it has not seen fire, and you'll see a closed canopy of overstory trees, which are the larger ones, and a dense mid-story of saplings. There's a dense mixture of maple, poplar, and other fire-intolerant species. On the right side of the road, you can see what fire has done to the exact same type of forest system. There's still a lot of big trees. There's probably a few less. You see the sapling component really is missing, and there's a lot more sunlight hitting that forest floor, which stimulates a ton of different grasses, wildflowers, plants that are vitally important for wildlife. But also underneath, there's a whole variety of young oak trees, which are actually not growing underneath this closed canopy. So this is a graph this is a chart that will just kind of show us that if you look at the larger trees, stems greater than 10 centimeters here on the left, what we'll call the parents, 64% of those are oaks, 12% are pines, and only a quarter of them are another species. However, if you look at the saplings and the seedlings that are underneath that overstory canopy, only 13% of those are oak. There's almost no pine component, and a lot of maple and poplar are taking over the rest of it. So the babies don't look like the parents, which is a problem when our oak forests are so important. So what have we been doing about it? Control burns are a very important forest restoration and land management technique. They do, however, require a large amount of planning, monitoring, and very careful implementation, but they can really help us start to achieve our goals of increasing diversity back across the landscape. So just a quick talk about prescribed fire. They do require a lot of planning. The first step is creating one of these burn plans. It's doing all the mapping, all the background work. It outlines a specific number of all the resources, people, engines, UTVs that we're going to need on the burn. It also includes the burn prescription, which is a set of parameters. They're all weather-based that need to be in place before we can do the burn. So for example, one burn may require a south wind that's between 3 and 10 miles an hour, a humidity of between 30 and 50%, and an air temperature of between 40 and 70. And if we're not in those parameters, we just can't do the burn that day. We've got to wait till better conditions. So this is just after we make the decision to move forward with the burn. The day starts with a briefing, which is right here. This is where the burn boss goes over all our safety protocols, exactly what our objectives are for the burn, and then we can actually move forward with putting fire on the ground, usually with a drip torch like this. Got people all around the burn with hand tools, with engines on UTVs to keep it inside the box. Kind of the largest and most amazing resource we've got that I want to mention is this amazing partnership of agencies and individuals that we've helped build over the past decade. To accomplish these large burns and to burn at a landscape scale, we really have to work together. And so the really neat part about this is it doesn't matter what uniform you're wearing, on whose ground that you're standing on, we're all working together to accomplish our shared goals. And so we partner with a variety of both state and federal agencies. So if you'll take a look at this drone footage of one of our burn units, you can actually see that prescribed fires created a patchwork of habitat types across this landscape. So in this unit, you'll see areas like this right here that are areas of early successional habitat where the fire got really hot. It killed a big bunch of trees right there, and that's out now all real young forest. There's a lot of young oaks in there, but there's a ton of browse. There's a ton of cover that's very important to a bunch of different wildlife species. In areas like this, you can see that fire killed a few trees, but it's again more of this open woodlands, a little bit more sunlight on the ground, and some more of that herbaceous understory that's important to wildlife. But then for a lot of the burn unit, you can see the fire just crept through without much impact on the canopy. And so really this is what we're shooting for. A patchwork of different age and structure is really ideal and provides habitat for a huge number of wildlife. So talking about wildlife, because I know this is what y'all really want to hear about, I'm going to talk to you about bears here in Virginia. You can start with some biology, talk life history, some about population distribution, and how bears are managed in the state of Virginia. So black bears are the only species of bear we have in Virginia. We don't have grizzlies. We don't have polar bears, just black bears. They've got an incredibly good sense of smell. It's 7 times stronger than that of a bloodhound. They see very similar to we do. They can see in color. Home ranges, so how big an area that they're using across the landscape. Kind of depends on the gender of the animal. Males generally have a larger home range size than females. It also seems like bears over in the mountains have a slightly larger home range sizes than they do in the Piedmont. A lot of that's just resource dependent, how far they've got to roam before they are able to get all their needs met. Size, males are generally a little bit larger than females. These aren't hard and fast. There's definitely some males that are out there that are much bigger than 500 pounds. I know I've seen one that was closer to 800 killed over in the eastern part of the state, and sow that was around 600 right over around Roanoke. So what do bears eat? It's roughly 75% vegetative matter. This is acorns, any type of berry, nuts, grasses, clover, fruits out on the landscape. They do, however, get 25%. 25% of that is protein that's coming from a variety of animals, whether it's rooting around in logs or stumps to eat insects or larvae, to scavenging on roadkill, to preying on smaller mammals, but they'll also eat fish. So behavior, they're active just about any time of the day. They are considered crepuscular, so they're most active at dawn and dusk. But if you see one in the middle of the day, there's not anything wrong with it. They're just out and about doing their thing. They're solitary most of the time. Spend most of their time alone. The exceptions are you'll see a sow that has cubs or yearlings with her, and during breeding season, often you'll see a male and a female together. They're intelligent and inquisitive. They're very curious. This actually gets them into trouble because if there's something new on the landscape, they can't help themselves. They've got to go check it out. They're omnivorous. Like I mentioned, they'll eat just about anything they can get their hands on, and they're opportunistic. They're just really driven by their stomachs. Normally, they're very naturally wary of humans. Bears out in the Allegheny Highlands don't have much interaction with folks. So oftentimes you don't even see them in the woods because they're getting out of there long before you even know that they're there. So how does a bear get through the year? Well, in spring, that's when they're coming out of their dens to search for food. Females are coming out with either their cubs or their yearlings. The males are usually solitary this time of year. Well, in the summer, when breeding starts to pick up, the sows will actually run the yearlings off, move them out of her territory, and that way she can be ready to breed again. The yearlings will usually remain with their siblings. The summer is when a lot of bears get into trouble. It's young males, just like I was at 12 or 13 years old. Don't really know what I'm doing. I'm hungry, so I'm just stumbling around trying to figure out the best way I can make a living. And that's the ones that end up in downtown Roanoke or in Charlottesville in a parking lot. So after the breeding season's over, and it moves into fall, bears really just start packing on pounds. So they're foraging up to 20 hours a day to gain weight to get ready for denning. So in preparation for the late fall, early winter, they're consuming a variety of foods that are high in carbohydrates that are stored as fat. So they can gain as much as a pound or two a day, beginning in late summer. One of the most important fall food crops for them are oak acorns. During years of high mass production of high acorn production, bears can actually more than double their body weight. This time of the year, they're also hitting any type of cornfield they can find, orchards, peaches, cherries, apples, and definitely attract bears, especially when it may be a poor mass crop and there are not a lot of natural foods available. So bears are not true hibernators, but they do usually enter a state of torpor for the winter months. Their body temperature drops about 10 degrees. So when they hibernate, they don't eat, drink, defecate, or urinate. Their metabolism's slow. Their heart rate really decrease, and they can lose close to 30% of their body weight during the denning period. So bears enter winter dens anywhere between October and January. The time of entry really depends on several different things: the reproductive status, weather, and available foods. Pregnant sows are usually the first ones to den up. Males usually wait till last. It really just depends on what kind of winter it is and how much food is available on the landscape. With a real wild winter, when there's still lots of acorns on the ground, oftentimes they really won't den until later on in the year. They use a variety of den forms, such as rock cavities. They'll dig out spots under a root ball, brush piles. In Western Virginia, most of the dens are actually in trees. So big old oaks that have rotted inside, they can climb up the side of it, find a hollow, drop down in it. In Eastern Virginia, they're doing a lot more in these ground dens. So in thick pine plantations or underneath a thicket of blackberry. They've been known to use some very interesting places to den as well. I've seen them den underneath porches and sheds right next to somebody's house. They've used grave sites, mine porters. My favorite is this little guy right here, who actually denned underneath a deer carcass that he found. So that's my kind of bear. He didn't want to be too far away from his snacks when he went to take a nap. Reproduction. Sows are normally, their first reproduction is when they're between 2 and 4 years old. They reproduce every couple years. Again, the breeding season is in the summer. They're actually bred in summer, but the fertilized egg just floats until December. This is a process called delayed implantation. And if the sow's in good body condition, she hasn't been really stressed, if there's plenty of food out on the landscape, they will actually go ahead and implant, and she'll become pregnant. If it's a year with not much mast, if it's a year that there's high stress for some reason, if she's got something going on, the egg won't implant, and the process will just start over the following summer. Cubs are born mid to late January in the den. Average litter size is between 2 and 3. Occasionally they'll have a single, and we've also had reports of 5 and even 6 cubs. They're born blind and helpless, just like a puppy or a kitten, and they stay with their mother for roughly 15 months. So this is a day-old cub. This was a foster that we actually had that my daughter's feeding, and that one was 3 weeks. That was probably about a month old. So what's taking bears off the landscape? Well, cubs actually have pretty high mortality, 20 to 25%. This is largely due to predation or just being separated from the sow. Adult mortality is usually pretty low. It's less than 2% annually. They don't have any natural predators, and they're relatively unaffected by any parasites or diseases. The only thing taking them off landscape is people, whether it's through a hunting season or through bear vehicle collisions, unfortunately. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the history of bears in Virginia. So there's real limited information on bear population numbers and distribution in Virginia prior to the 20th century, but they were very abundant throughout Virginia in colonial times. After the American Revolution, Virginia actually offered a bounty on bears, and bear numbers really appeared to be declining by the 1800s. With increased deforestation, with wholesale clear cutting, and continued human population growth, it really knocked numbers all the way down to about by 1900, they were almost near extinction. So the only bears we had left then were over in the western mountains and down near Great Dismal Swamp. So the population started to bounce back. In 1911, there were some land purchases began that really kind of created some large parks that secured some protected habitat for bears. That's Mount Rogers, Natural Bridge, and Shenandoah. By the mid-40s, they were bouncing back in some of the western mountain counties. There were some hunting regulations passed to protect females, and the population has really just been steadily growing and expanding since then. So this is roughly the bear population in the 1970s. Again, they were really over in the Blue Ridge and the Allegheny Mountains and down in the Great Dismal Swamp. In the 1980s, they'd spread a little bit more. They'd started using these river corridors to move across southeastern Virginia. Again, by the 90s, they just continued to spread. By 2001, it wasn't abnormal to see a bear just about any part of the state, but still had these kind of main areas. Now, you pretty much live in bear country. Unless you're over on the eastern shore or in some of your far eastern counties, it's not unusual for you to have bears living pretty nearby. So black bears occur in all 13 of our southeastern states. Bears in Virginia's western mountains actually belong to the largest contiguous bear population in the southeast. It's probably no surprise, but our largest bear populations are down in the Great Dismal Swamp and in the Blue Ridge and Alleghenies. So something that folks always ask about is do I need to be worried about being attacked by a bear? You know, what do I do when I'm hiking about bears? Well, in North America, there are roughly 25 black bear caused injuries each year. 90% of them are minor injuries, and 90% of them are from bears that have just gotten too used to people. They're either food conditioned or they've just lost their fear of humans. But something that isn't really interesting and something I feel like I should talk about is that since 2010, and this data is a few years old, there have been roughly 92 black bear attacks. Almost half of them involve dogs in some way or another. In most cases, it's because the dogs were running loose and drew bear back to the owner. People hiking with their dogs, not on a leash. Dog runs into the bear chases the dog back to the person. So it's just a defensive attack really triggered by the presence of a bear. And so Dr. Stephen Herrera, who's an animal behaviorist, has said that canids and ursids, dogs and bears, have an ancient rivalry, and this evolved conflict can quickly spill over to involve humans if they are nearby. So I just always encourage folks, if you're hiking in bear country, just keep your dog on a leash and keep you both out of trouble. So that in reality, many people are really afraid of being killed or hurt by a bear. For every person killed by a bear in North America, you've got 60 killed by dogs and 350 by lightning. So it's a pretty slim chance. So black bear management in Virginia. I use this slide because I think it illustrates how adaptable black bears are and how challenging it can make managing them. So who's responsible for managing bears in Virginia? That's the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. They're the state agency in charge of managing bears statewide. We kind of manage bears at two different levels. One is this population management, where they're trying to increase or decrease overall bear population size in a given area. They're able to do this by manipulating the length and timing of different hunting seasons. The other level of management, what I'm going to be talking more about, is targeting human bear interactions. And this requires an effort both from the agency but from the general public. So prior to the 1930s, dealing with nuisance bears was really just left up to the landowner's discretion. In 1969, it was in the Virginia Game Commission, actually started moving nuisance bears to other locations to alleviate some bear problems. And throughout the 80s and 90s, they were relocating about 50 bears a year. Now, Department of Wildlife Resources is rarely moving any bears. They absolutely won't trap a bear for getting in the trash or getting into bird feeders. They're more than happy to work with homeowners on ways to minimize conflicts and attractants and provide advice. So they use a variety of options to help the public deal with human-bear conflicts. Most of these are non-lethal options, whether it's public education, helping folks try to figure out how to keep bears out of things, using repellents such as noise or guard animals, using adversive conditioning such as harassment, pepper spray, or paintballs. Virginia state code, Virginia state law does authorize issuing kill permits to landowners or farmers that are having damage to crops, livestock, or property. And so they can always use, another thing they can do is euthanasia. It's an absolute last resort, and they only use that when there's really a high public safety risk. And it's kind of the last option. So why don't they move bears anymore? Why just isn't it why the shift? Well, moving the bear or translocation doesn't solve the original problem of the attractant. If the original bear is moved, the attractant is still present. It's really just a matter of time before a different bear shows up and gets into the same situation. Also, bears have an incredibly strong homing instinct based on movement data from really across the country. The minute you trap that bear, haul it somewhere else, the minute their paws hit the ground in a new location, they're headed back out trying to find their way back to their home territory. And as they do that, there's just opens them up to a much wider threat of hazards. They have to deal with traveling in and through other bear territories and having conflicts with them. And there's a much higher risk of negative human interactions or vehicle collisions. So this is just an example of translocation that I wanted to share because I find it so interesting. This is the same time frame, so the same amount of time, and it's the same number of points. So these blue dots right here are a bear that was trapped in Appomattox County, right there in the state forest. We put a collar on her, and that's where she spent all her time. The red dots, however, it's a bear that we trapped on the north side of Roanoke and decided we were going to move her over here just in Buckingham County, just north of Andersonville. So you can see she spent about 8 hours there before she took off. And so in the same amount of time, she ranged essentially over, from way east of Lynchburg almost over into Bedford. So it just shows that this bear would have a lot higher chance of getting into trouble either with a car or running into getting in a bad situation with humans. So it's just not a good idea to move. So in talking to folks at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, when it comes to folks calling in and complaining about bears, the majority, over 80% of them, are just about bears getting into trash and bears getting into birdseed. Some of them are about bears getting into chicken coops, but overall, that's the majority of complaints that are coming. So why are bears so attracted to that stuff? I apologize for this chart being hard to read, but the reason that our bears like our stuff is that it's full of calories. Birdseed and acorns are really actually pretty similar in calorie content, but bears are like me, really like to eat and pretty lazy. So it's a whole lot easier for them to raid a bird feeder for 5 pounds of seed than walk around in the woods and pick up 5 pounds of acorns. Likewise, it's really easy for them to come up on a screen porch or a deck and grab a bag of dog food that's got almost 45,000 calories in it. So if you live in an area where you've got bears around your neighborhood, here's some easy steps to help minimize conflict between bears and humans. It'll also save you a lot of work from picking up trash when a bear does get into it. An easy solution is to make your trash storage bear-proof with one of these bear-resistant can caddies. And so they've got these commercial bear-proof storage in cans, but there are a variety of ways to make your existing trash containers much more resistant to bears. So you can visit Department of Wildlife Resources website and find plans on how to build one of these caddies or actually install hardware on your can yourself for only about 25 bucks. Another massive way to reduce human-bear conflict is take down your bird feeder starting in late spring and leaving them down until bears have denned up in the fall. Birds usually have plenty of natural food during this time and don't need the supplemental food. So just to reiterate, the most important way to minimize human-bear conflicts is to keep trash and other human food away from bears. So with that, and for a great chance at seeing one of these amazing black bears in Virginia, I'd love to invite all of you to come out and visit us at Warm Springs Mountain Preserve over in Bath County. It's a great place to see bears. I see one, probably one in every 3 times up there. And I'm lucky to be able to work as part of a great team based over in Hot Springs. This is the rest of the team: Nicole Simmons and Laurel Shabline. They're both members of our prescribed fire operations staff and responsible for our science, conservation, and stewardship work across the Allegheny Highlands. My contact information is listed here. Here's our TNC Virginia website. I'd like to thank you all for your time tonight, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so if we have any questions, feel free to either type them in the chat or go ahead and take yourself off audio and ask it out loud. And this lecture as well has been recorded, so we will be sending it out to everyone in the next 2 weeks.
This is Catherine Knox at the Nature Conservancy. Blair, would it be helpful if you talked about a regular day at your preserve and how often you run into bears in your day-to-day job?
Sure thing, can absolutely do that. We spend a bunch of time up on the preserve doing a variety of monitoring. So we can, we'll actually go up and we monitor bird populations, we monitor vegetation response to prescribed fire. So we have plots and areas that we have burned versus that we have not burned. So then we can see the difference in that. So we can see if we're making the changes that we want. And as we're out and about, we see bears pretty frequently. It's usually, like I guess, like I said, it's usually one in about every 3 times we'll run into bears up.
Okay, some questions are coming in. This is from Honey Sweet Harmony McCadden. What are the rules around bear hunting in West Virginia? Sounded like in Virginia, only special permits to private landowners, not on public lands?
So Virginia, I can speak better to it because I'm more familiar with it. You can hunt bears on public lands in Virginia, and you don't need a special permits to private landowners. That's only when they're causing crop damage, they can get special permits then. But there's an archery season for bears in Virginia that lasts pretty much from October to December. And there's a variety of muzzle loading and rifle seasons that are available on both private and public lands here in Virginia.
All right, and Roger Kirby is asking, when do the populations of bear in Virginia become too large? And are those populations controlled by hunters? And when are the populations controlled by hunters?
Afternoon or evening, Roger, how are you? When the populations of bear in Virginia, as far as it becoming too large, there's 2 different things at work. You've got biological carrying capacity, which is how many bears the landscape will actually hold. And you've got cultural carrying capacity, which is how many bears the people on the landscape can actually hold. And cultural carrying capacity is usually lower, and it really just depends on what part of the state you're in. Hunting is the main tool that's used to manage those populations. So having people out there on the landscape hunting bears are definitely good ways to reduce the bear population. If that's what the department thinks is necessary.
Okay, and here's one from Stephen Jameson. What is the best thing to do when you run into bears when you're fishing?
Sorry, I got stuck on mute. The best thing you can do is just make plenty of noise. If you just look at them and make yourself big and yell at them, normally they'll just take off and run from you.
They're not going to try to get your fish?
Not usually. I mean, I've seen some videos out west in Alaska where grizzlies would come up and take a trout off a fly rod, but I haven't seen that happen here in Virginia.
And the next question is from Walter. What are the dates for bear season in Bath County?
Walter, I don't have those dates in front of me, but I can look those up and send them to you. I know archery season is in right now, and bear season should be coming in here in the next, I think mid-November, early December, but I can send those dates to you.
All right, and Mamie asked, are there restrictions to what kind of bears can be hunted?
So there are. It's illegal to shoot I'm sorry. It's illegal to shoot a sow with cubs. So you're not allowed to harvest those, and it's illegal to harvest one of the small bears, one of the cubs. They have to be at least 100 pounds.
Okay, and another question from Honey. What were some local Monacan, Powhatan, etc. indigenous practices related to bear hunting prior to colonizers' arrival?
I know they were hunting bears. As far as how, I'm not exactly sure, but they were hunting them for their, for the meat, for the skins. So they were definitely using the bears that were on the landscape.
And Roger asks, historically, have black bears been the only species of bear in Virginia, as far as we know?
They have been. I don't think we've ever had that I'm aware of. I don't know that we've had any of the larger brown bears that are out west. And Honey, you're absolutely right. They definitely rendered the fat down for sure.
And Amanda says, hi Blair, good to see you. I know you have some good stories from bear cub rescues in Virginia. Any favorites? That's a good prompt.
That is a good prompt. Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it. I've had a lot of fun ones. I've had to climb trees and grab cubs out of it. But I guess my favorite part of cubs is being able to put them back in a wild den. Being able to slip into a den, drop a cub, and have somebody else that's sitting there with binoculars looking a little bit farther into the den and seeing the sow grab the cub and nurse it. It's just pretty amazing. It's just a pretty amazing thing to get to see.
And Cab is asking, where in Virginia has the greatest bear density?
That's a tough one. Down in the swamp definitely has a pile of bears. Madison and Page County, they have a lot of bears as well. So I would probably say the Blue Ridge Mountains and down in the swamp.
And Stephen is asking, do you have any stories about people making pets out of wild bears?
Unfortunately, some folks have tried to get a cub, have found a cub and tried to raise it. It never ends up well for the person or the bear. They're so smart. Once people try to start training them or using them, keep them as a pet, it just never ends up well. They're wild animals, and it's best just to keep them wild.
And Peter is asking, how do bears catch fish?
So there's tons of great videos right now, actually, out in some of the rivers out west of grizzlies and black bears both catching salmon as they're coming up rivers. But I've also seen them just in real shallow water. They'll just walk out and essentially just hunt them and grab them. So they can get pretty good at it.
Honey's asking, what would a non-professional do if they come across what they think is an injured, orphan, or sick bear, adult or cub? We used to volunteer at Wildlife Center of Virginia, also aware of Southwest Wildlife Center, not sure if they do bear intake. Not assuming a cub is alone, abandoned, or orphaned, how to gauge it and who to contact.
The best thing you can do is call your local Department of Wildlife Resources office. They've also got an 800 number that you can call into a dispatch 24 hours a day, and they'll send that out to an officer or a biologist who will give you a call, talk to you about it, try to figure out what's going on. If need to, come out and do something with the cub or the adult bear if it needs to be.
And Roger was amazed that a cub could be nursed right away. Does the sow have to have other cubs?
She does. So we were only able to do that when it was a sow that had given birth in the den, and she had first-year cubs. So she's already got cubs that she's nursing, and so we could just slip in. And in some instances, we'd really just slip in, drop the cub in the den, and see what happened. In other instances, we have to immobilize the sow, walk in and dart her, knock her down, do a quick workup, switch out her collar, and then put the cub back in. But it does only work if she's already got cubs of roughly the same age.
Okay, well, I think that is all the questions that we have. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. This has been recorded. It's going to take us about 2 weeks to get it up, and then we'll be sending you guys a link to a private YouTube page where you can come and listen to this all over again. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to email us at info@nationalsporting.org, and we can send those questions to Blair and see if we can help you guys with some more answers.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you so much, Blair.
Thank y'all.